Holy Father, nothing in my house is broken, and yet peace no longer seems to live here." The letter was waiting among the morning correspondence when it reached Pope Leo XIV, tucked between formal reports, invitations, and the requests that all carried the language of institutions. This one did not. It was written in the hand of a woman who was not trying to sound important, only truthful. And that was precisely why it was difficult to set aside. She did not ask for money. She did not describe an illness. She did not tell him that tragedy had struck her family all at once. Instead, she wrote about something harder to name and, for that reason, harder to bear. She wrote that the table was still full, but meals no longer felt warm. She wrote that her children still lived under the same roof, yet each one seemed to be withdrawing into a private distance no wall could explain. She wrote that prayer, once simple and natural, had become strangely heavy, as though the words still existed, but no longer knew where to rest. She wrote that conversations in the house had become sharp in ways they had never been before, and that even ordinary evenings now seemed to end with a tiredness deeper than fatigue. Nothing in the house had collapsed. No one looking in from the outside would have said that anything was terribly wrong. And yet, she could not escape the feeling that something essential had quietly left. Leo himself read the letter slowly, then read it again. Not because the woman had written dramatically, but because she had written with the kind of plain sorrow that reveals more than argument ever can. As he moved from line to line, he recognized that this was not the story of one family alone, but the hidden grief of Christian homes. The woman had not written that her house was falling down. She had written something more painful. It was standing, but seemed no longer able to keep peace. And from that letter, Leo began with calm. Leo began with calm, and that calm changed everything, because it kept the woman's grief from being pushed into the wrong kind of darkness. He did not treat her letter as a sign of hidden curses, strange presences, or mysterious forces moving through the rooms of her home. He did not encourage her to search the house with suspicion, as though every object might carry a warning and every corner might conceal something ominous. Just as importantly, the Pope did not reduce her suffering to imagination. He understood that homes can become spiritually burdened without becoming theatrical, and that families can lose peace in ways that are deeply real, even when nothing dramatic can be seen from the outside. So Leo refused the language of superstition and chose the language of discernment. Fear asks, "What terrible thing is in this house?" Discernment asks, "What is happening to the people who live here, and what is shaping their life together?" Fear turns the home into a place of anxiety. Discernment allows it to be seen truthfully. It notices what nourishes love and what weakens it, what protects reverence and what erodes it, what opens the heart to grace and what slowly trains the heart to live without it. In that sense, the question before the family was never about decoding signs. It was about reading the life of the home in the light of faith. For Leo, a Christian home was never merely a roof stretched over ordinary routines. It was the place where love learned endurance, where husband and wife discovered fidelity through small sacrifices, where children first encountered faith not as an argument, but as a pattern of prayer, patience, gratitude, and forgiveness, and where the presence of God was meant to be woven into daily life so naturally that even simple acts could become holy. A house forms more than schedules. It forms souls. That is why he did not ask the woman whether there was something evil in her home. He asked a far deeper question. What in this home is drawing the family closer to God, and what in this home is quietly leading them away from Him, away from one another, and away from the peace they were created to live in. Only then can the family recognize the atmosphere it has been inhabiting lately. Once fear is set aside, the house can finally be looked at in truth. And once truth begins to appear, he moves toward the home itself, like a shepherd entering a place that has been tired for a long time. And once Leo enters that house through the woman's letter, he does not arrive like an inspector looking for evidence, nor like a judge preparing to condemn. He enters the way a shepherd enters a place where weariness has been living for a long time, with patience, attention, and the kind of silence that allows things to begin speaking. He hardly needs to see much. A home, when it has been carrying strain for years, will often tell its story through small details, and he knows how to read them. What first draws his eye is not something dramatic, but something damaged that has remained in place too long. It may be a cracked frame still hanging where everyone passes it, a surface chipped and never mended, a chair no one trusts but no one removes, a corner worn down by neglect until decline itself becomes part of the room. None of this matters because such things possess mysterious power. They matter because they reveal what the family has slowly learned to tolerate. A house begins to reflect the habits of the people who live within it, and sometimes what it reflects is not poverty, but postponement. What should have been repaired was delayed. What should have been faced was left for later. What should have been healed was allowed to remain half broken because everyone adjusted around it. In time, that adjustment reaches beyond furniture and walls. It enters conversations, relationships, old injuries, apologies never spoken, grief never named, tenderness never restored. The damaged object is not the wound itself. It is only the visible sign that a family may have grown too familiar with what remains unresolved. Then Leo's attention shifts to something harder to describe, but real. Certain homes lose their openness long before they lose their order. The rooms may still be arranged, the shelves may still be full, and the appearance of comfort may remain untouched. Yet the atmosphere has changed in a way no visitor could easily explain. Light no longer seems welcomed, but blocked. Space no longer invites rest, but withdrawal. The home begins to feel closed in on itself, as if every room were keeping its tension. This is not darkness in a superstitious sense. It is darkness in the human sense, the kind that grows when a house no longer supports recollection, gratitude, gentleness, or peace. He recognizes that there are homes with furniture, polished floors, and every necessity, yet the spirit inside them feels tired, guarded, and unable to breathe deeply. A house can remain full and still stop making room for the human heart to truly rest in God. At last, Leo notices what is simply accumulated beyond usefulness. Drawers no longer open without resistance. Shelves hold objects kept out of guilt, habit, or the unwillingness to let anything go. Corners become storage for things no one loves, no one uses, and no one has the courage to release. The problem is not that these items are evil. The problem is that they continue occupying space after they have ceased to serve life. In a home like this, excess begins to create its own heaviness. It crowds the eye, burdens the mind, and leaves little room for clarity, beauty, or relief. What once may have been kept with good reason now remains only because no one has found the strength to decide. And when that inability settles into the house, it often mirrors an inner condition. People hold on to old resentments, old habits, old disappointments, long after they have stopped giving anything good. The crowded room becomes a parable of the crowded soul, So this is not a lesson in hunting for bad signs hidden in ordinary things. It is a lesson in reading the house as one reads a life, honestly, patiently, and in the presence of God. He teaches the family to see that what is cracked, what is darkened, and what is overcrowded may all be revealing the same deeper need. Yet he also knows that a home cannot be healed merely by removing what is misplaced. Once the wrong things are cleared away, the house must be filled again with what truly belongs there. And what truly belongs there is not simply better organization, cleaner surfaces, or a more pleasing arrangement of familiar things. Leo knows that a house can be less cluttered and still remain spiritually tired, because emptiness by itself does not become peace, and space by itself does not become grace. Something can be removed from a home without anything holy taking its place. And when that happens, the family may enjoy a sense of relief without ever reaching the deeper renewal it was longing for. That is why he does not stop at what must be cleared away. He moves toward what must be restored. What the house has lost more than anything else is a real place for God. Not an abstract belief kept somewhere in the background. Not a religious identity remembered on holy days. Not a vague respect for sacred things that never enters the fabric of ordinary life, but a place. A visible, humble, unmistakable place that tells everyone who lives there that this home is not held together by routine alone. It lives or fails to live according to whether God is welcomed into its center. And so the Pope leads the family to imagine something small and decisive. A corner set apart for prayer, a crucifix placed where eyes can return to it, a Bible opened and not merely stored, an image of Our Lady or the Holy Family, a candle, a small bottle of holy water near the entrance, some simple sign that this house belongs not only to those who inhabit it, but to the Lord who sustains it. Leo is careful here, and his care matters. He does not speak as though devotional objects carried automatic power, as though a crucifix on the wall could heal a family that refuses conversion, or a Bible on a table could save a home where no one is willing to pray, forgive, or listen. That would not be faith. It would only be a religious version of control. What he is restoring is not superstition dressed in sacred language, but the logic of Catholic life itself, in which outward signs educate the heart. The visible things do not replace grace. They dispose the soul to receive it. They remind the family again and again that God is not supposed to remain an occasional thought. He is meant to dwell at the center of daily life, where mornings begin, burdens are carried, meals are shared, and evenings come to rest. That is why the recovery of a home often begins in one small place. A shelf once crowded with neglected things becomes a prayer corner. A space that collected dust and delay becomes the place where someone pauses before work, where a mother leaves a whispered intention, where a father opens Scripture for a few minutes, where children learn, perhaps awkwardly at first, that prayer belongs inside the home, and not only inside a church building. Sometimes the change is almost invisible at first, because the furniture remains the same and the walls do not move, yet the meaning of the house begins to shift. What had been merely functional starts becoming intentional. What had been private starts becoming consecrated. The family begins to remember through repeated and ordinary gestures that this dwelling was never meant to be only a site of survival, but a place of communion, mercy, and the presence of God. The house begins to change, not because an object has appeared, but because a relationship has been invited back. God is no longer treated as a distant idea. He has been given a place, And once God has a place in the home, everything else must begin to change with it. And once God has been given a place in the home, the question is no longer only where the crucifix stands, where the Bible rests, or whether a corner has been set aside for prayer. The deeper question becomes whether the people living inside that home are willing to let their lives be rearranged around the presence they have invited back. Leo does not allow the story to end with a restored prayer corner or a more orderly room, because he knows that peace is not built by objects, even sacred ones, but by habits, tones of voice, daily choices, and the repeated decisions through which a family either opens itself to grace or slowly closes against it. So the Pope brings the listener closer into the hidden rhythm of ordinary life. Peace begins in small practices that seem almost too simple to matter, and yet they shape the atmosphere of a home more deeply than dramatic gestures ever could. A prayer at the beginning of the day can change the way burdens are carried. The sign of the cross before a meal can remind a family that gratitude belongs at the table as much as food does. A gentler sentence, chosen instead of one that wounds, can preserve warmth where irritation would have damaged it. Slowing down enough to hear another person fully, instead of reacting too quickly, can keep tired hearts from growing harder. Even the effort to keep the house bright, clean, and ordered takes on new meaning when it is done not as perfectionism, but as a form of mutual respect. A quiet way of saying that the people who live here matter and should be received by one another with care. Leo also understands how much of family life is now scattered by distraction. A home may contain everyone and still fail to gather anyone. People can share walls while living in separate interior worlds, divided by noise, haste, screens, exhaustion, and the constant temptation to remain unavailable even while physically present. That is why he points toward moments of real attention, spaces in the day when devices are set aside, interruptions are softened, and the family becomes visible to itself again. These are not grand spiritual achievements. They are humble acts of presence, yet they make room for grace to work where love is most often tested. In this way, he shows that God does not remain only in the prayer corner. God is present in the way a husband answers his wife when he is tired, in the patience with which a wife receives a burden she did not create, in the attention parents give their children when those children do not yet know how to ask for help. And in the gratitude a family chooses to keep alive, even in a modest and imperfect life. Peace does not return because one object has been removed from a shelf. It returns when a household learns to live before God according to a new rhythm. Yet he also knows that some homes, even after outward change has begun, still carry a weight far deeper than arrangement alone can touch. And when that hidden weight remains beneath cleaner rooms, calmer meals, and prayers begun again, he does not turn away. He follows it to its source, because unrest at home rarely begins with walls. It begins in the human heart. And once Leo follows the unrest beneath the surface of the home, he no longer looks first at furniture, light, arrangement, or even the habits that have shaped the rooms. He looks at the people. He looks at the husband and wife who still share a roof, but have forgotten how to speak without defending themselves. He looks at children growing up inside the climate their parents have created, learning tension before trust, distance before tenderness, and silence before prayer. He looks at a table where food is still served, yet conversation has thinned into necessity, where presence remains physical but communion has quietly disappeared. And in that shift from the house itself to the lives unfolding inside it, the Pope finds the wound that weighs more than any neglected object ever could. For very often the thing that robs a home of peace is not what sits on its shelves, but what has passed between the souls living there. One cutting sentence repeated too many times. One season of anger that was never brought into the light. One old disappointment that hardened into resentment. One grief no one knew how to share. One pattern of coldness that slowly became normal. Families do not usually lose peace all at once. More often they lose it through accumulation, through words that wound and are never healed, through indifference that grows where affection once lived, through meals eaten together without genuine encounter, through fatigue that becomes irritability, and through the quiet spiritual fact that when people stop turning toward God together, they often begin, little by little, to turn away from one another as well. This is why Leo does not deepen fear. He deepens truth. He does not tell the family to become more alarmed. He tells them to become more honest. There may be no strange presence in the home except the presence of old injuries still left untouched. There may be no darkness there except the darkness that grows when forgiveness is postponed, when prayer becomes rare, when the Eucharist is neglected, when confession is avoided, and when the members of a household continue living side by side without ever bringing their poverty before God. His pastoral strength lies here. He refuses to flatter the family, but he also refuses to abandon them to despair. He leads them into repentance not as punishment, but as the only path by which love can breathe again. So his invitation becomes deeper and more concrete. Pray again not only briefly, but more honestly. Ask a priest to bless the home, not because the walls are magical, but because the family needs to place its life once more under the lordship of Christ. Return to Mass, where grace is not imagined but given. Return to the sacrament of reconciliation, where the heart is taught again how to tell the truth and receive mercy. Learn to speak words that households often delay for far too long. I was wrong. Forgive me. I did not listen. I have been distant. Let us begin again. In this way, the Pope shows that the deepest cleansing of a home does not happen when surfaces are cleared, but when consciences are opened, pride is lowered, and charity is permitted to return. And here the meaning of his guidance rises into view. What must be saved is not merely the house, but the soul of the home. Not merely its order, but its communion. Not merely its appearance, but its capacity to shelter love, prayer, gratitude, truth, tenderness, sacrifice, and the living presence of God. A family can repair a room and still remain divided. It can clear a shelf and still remain cold. It can improve the atmosphere and still avoid conversion. But when the soul of the home begins to heal, even old rooms seem changed, because the people within them begin to live differently before God and before one another. And once he has led the family to that deepest wound, he does not leave them there. He knows the story cannot end in heaviness, because grace never exposes in order to humiliate. It exposes in order to heal. So after reaching the root of what has burdened the house for so long, Leo begins to lead it back toward what it was always meant to be before the Lord. What it was always meant to be is not a perfect house, not a flawless family, and not a life in which every wound disappears at once. So when the story returns to the woman who wrote the letter, nothing suggests that her home has suddenly become richer, easier, or untouched by weakness. The same walls remain, the same rooms remain, The same ordinary responsibilities still wait for those who live there. Yet something more important than comfort has begun to change, because the atmosphere of the home is no longer governed by quiet estrangement. It has begun, slowly and truly, to remember peace. The broken things that had been left too long have been faced at last. What no longer served life has been cleared away. A place has been made for prayer again, not as decoration, but as a sign that God is no longer being kept at a distance. A crucifix now stands where eyes can return to it. Scripture is no longer closed and forgotten. The home has not become impressive, but it has become more honest, and honesty is often the beginning of healing. The rooms feel lighter, not because they are grand, but because they no longer carry the same silent surrender to neglect. More deeply still, the people within the house have begun to live differently. Words are not perfect, but they are gentler. Meals are not transformed into ideal scenes, but they are less burdened, less tense, and more human. The family is learning again that to live together is not merely to occupy the same space, but to be present to one another before God. A prayer can gather what the day has scattered. A quieter answer can interrupt an old pattern of injury. A small act of gratitude can open a window where resentment once kept everything closed. The great miracle is not that the family has escaped struggle, but that struggle no longer has the final word. This is the restoration Leo was leading them toward all along. Not staged holiness, but daily fidelity in which God is welcomed, forgiveness is practiced, and ordinary life is consecrated. And that is how the Pope returns a house to its true vocation as a Christian home. It becomes once more a place where people are formed in love, corrected by truth, sustained by mercy, and held together by a presence greater than their own strength. Some homes do not collapse all at once. They simply grow empty of prayer, tenderness, and peace. And some homes become alive again the moment God is welcomed back, not only into a corner of the house, but into the hearts of those who live there. Nếu bạn muốn, mình sẽ làm tiếp một vòng nữa theo hướng nâng đỡ cinematic và tự nhiên của lời kể, nhưng vẫn giữ nguyên số từ từng phần.